when I get to telling you what I do and the authority that we do have some expansive authority when it comes to things within my wheelhouse. But I want to start here, kind of level setting. So no internet, no cable, no cell phones, no heating oil dealers, 900 numbers. There's a whole list of things on this slide that we either never had jurisdiction over or it was removed from us over time. Next slide, please. Okay, so continuing the theme of Pura being a different type of agency, and we'll spend a moment on this because it will illustrate why it's so important to engage with us moving forward. If you're familiar with another state agency, you might be familiar with the term a commissioner or a secretary and or member of the governor's cabinet. Pura is different in that we have 3 commissioners, myself and 2 others. I hold the title of chairman, which allows me to do some extra things like set our agenda, the staff report to me. But when it comes to making a decision as a body, it's a lot like an appellate court. So if you can think of the 3 of us, like judges, there are 3 of us, which means that any decision out of Pura has to be approved by a majority. And we don't always agree. In fact, I've dissented on a number of items over the past couple of years of my term. But we do often agree. But the best way to think of us are judges, which is important because we go to the next slide. How we make decisions on the things that we do have jurisdiction over, again, looks a lot like a court case. So we have all of our work has to be conducted in public, much in the way that a court case would. And we do our work through what are called dockets. So a docket can be initiated at the direction of myself. It can be initiated at the direction of the legislature. Another party can ask me to investigate a docket. The utility can ask me to open a docket. So once a docket is initiated on a specific matter, then we go into a discovery process. So again, if you're thinking about a court case, a judge has to have evidence in front of it in order to make a decision. So we have parties that intervene in our cases. We can ask questions of the parties that are asking for something to be done. And then ultimately we'll go to an actual hearing or a technical meeting if it's less formal, where we'll sit and we will investigate the matter before us by asking questions of witnesses. We'll take evidence. And following that process and legal briefs, we will issue a draft decision, at which point parties can still provide comments and oral arguments before ultimately we will vote on a matter at a public meeting. Again, 99% of what we do is in the public eye. Occasionally, if something is of a confidential nature, like a specific vendor price, for example, we may go into a closed door session, but I've only done 3 of those over the 3 years I've been here, and we have upwards of 100 dockets a year. So it's really a tiny percentage of what we do is not open to the public. So next slide, please. So we are a creature of statute. So Pura exists because the legislature has delegated certain authority to us. With that authority, we can do regulations. We can also issue decisions, which are legally binding. So when I make a decision, assuming that I have at least one of my colleagues voting with me, it is a legally binding decision on those that I regulate. And what that means is they have to abide by what I do. Or I can fine them if they fail to abide by the orders that I've issued, which we have done a number of times recently. They can also appeal my decision to the Superior Court. And they've also done that quite a bit lately. So the other things I want to touch on the screen are statutory parties. So you may be wondering, okay, well, if Pura and the commissioners are the judges, who is representing me as the ratepayer? And I get that question a lot. Like, aren't you, Marissa, aren't you the consumer advocate? And the answer is no. I am not the consumer advocate. I am the judge. So there is a statutory party called the Office of Consumer Counsel, or OCC for short. We have a wonderful new woman who is less than a year into the role. And the OCC is what's called a statutory party in every case that I open, which basically means they don't have to request the right to intervene. They have automatic standing in my proceedings. And it is their job to represent the interests of you all, in this instance you're called ratepayers. So it is their job to represent your interests in our proceedings. And there are other statutory parties. There's an office agency called DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. They represent environmental interests in our proceedings. And then the utilities are going to be a statutory party. It is their rights that I'm looking to affect through this proceeding. Lastly, on this slide, I want to cover ex parte rules. So if you're familiar with Perry Mason or Law and Order or something like that, or you were a lawyer, you watched legal programming, you may be familiar with the fact that anytime the judge wants to speak to an attorney, they have to do so with the other side's attorney present, right? You're never having a closed-door conversation with one of the parties. And that's referring to something called an ex parte prohibition. That means that any time, in this instance, it means that any time a matter is pending before Pura, or will be pending before Pura, I cannot speak to anybody, whether it's you all or the utility. I cannot speak to you about anything that I'm going to do in that case, substantively. I can't speculate about what I'm going to do. I can't listen to your concerns. I can't give you any feedback unless it's in a publicly noticed hearing. So if you've seen some of the public notices that we've done, I'll get into that in a second, where we are hearing, we specifically hold hearings to hear from you all, the public. It's important to come to those because the matter has to be publicly noticed in order for me to receive evidence. And that's a legal rule in front of how we adjudicate our proceedings. And that may seem tough here, but I can guarantee it goes both ways, which means I do not sit behind closed doors at any point ever with Eversource or any of the other utilities. So it is a legal protection for everyone involved. So, next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to do 2 slides on how to engage with Pura. And what I'm trying to convey here is that there are passive to really active ways to engage with us. And if I haven't convinced you at this point yet that it's important to engage with us, let me give it one more try. So I can only make a decision based on the evidence in front of me. So it does not matter if I look outside and say, gee, the sky is blue. If no one has put evidence into the docket in front of me saying with credibility that the sky is blue, if a utility tells me, no, the sky is purple, and the OCC argues the sky is green, it doesn't matter that I know the sky is blue. I need to have evidence put into the docket in front of me. So that is why it is critical for folks who have on-the-ground experience with the utilities, whether it's in a customer service issue that you've experienced, whether it's a quality of service issue you've experienced. It is crucially important that that turns into evidence in my proceeding so I can make a decision and cite to that. So in a moment, I'll give you an example of how that has been actually utilized. But I'm going to tell you the couple of ways to engage with us. So in the most passive form of engagement, if you just want to know what I'm doing on a daily basis, again, everything I do is public. So we have an online schedule. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we have about 100 active dockets at any given time. That is a lot. I don't expect you to monitor or even know what 100 dockets I'm doing at any given time. And frankly, they're not going to all affect you because I regulate utilities that may not serve you. Like I imagine most of you are Eversource customers, which means you probably don't care so much what I'm doing with United Illuminating. So you can, if you do find a docket that is of interest, and you just want to stay in touch, you can sign up for email alerts, and that's the easiest, the most passive form of engagement.
What you're seeing on the screen right now is the cover page and a citation to the portion of the decision from the Tropical Storm Isaias docket. So you may remember 2 years ago, I certainly remember, it was a couple months into my term here, having moved up here for this job with my family. And Tropical Storm Isaias came through. Most people, including myself, lost power for up to 10 days. And what followed was an 8-month investigation by my agency into the preparation and response to that storm by the utilities. And in that case, we had some interveners. A couple of the towns, they gathered their resources and they hired attorneys and put on witnesses. They had their first selectmen and first select women appear as a witness panel in that proceeding. We also received over 500 written comments, and I held a couple of public hearings where people, about 100 people, provided verbal testimony. So I know it feels like a long time ago, but when that decision came out, we actually levied the maximum civil penalty on Eversource that was allowable under the law. It was $28.4 million. Under the law that was in effect at the time, we were capped at fining them 1% of their annual distribution revenue. So $28.4 million sounds like a lot. It's not. When you think about how many ratepayers Eversource has, there's over 1 million ratepayers of Eversource. And so when that was returned to customers, and it has been, and I get this question a lot, well, what happened to that fine money? It's already been returned by a bill credit over the course of a year. It was on your bill called BCC-TV, and it amounted to, on average, about anywhere between 60 cents and $1 per customer per month over the course of a year. Wow. Not enough to buy a cup of coffee, right? So the good news here is that we were able to work with our partners in the legislature to convince them 1% penalty is not going to make a difference to these folks, right? And so through the Take Back Our Grid Act, they actually raised the ceiling of that to 4%. There's a lot of other things in that legislation, but that was one thing, which means that I could find them a higher value amount if this happens again, which we are taking a lot of steps to make sure it doesn't. But the purpose of referencing this docket and this proceeding is to show you that this is one of many examples from the past 3 years of my term where the participation of folks like you made a real difference to the outcome. Because absent those public comments, absent the witnesses from the municipalities, we would have had Eversource in front of us, and they were in front of us telling us, you're misunderstanding, you did a great job. Now, if that's the only evidence I have in the record, it doesn't leave me with a lot. So I can say without a doubt that the participation of ratepayers and the municipalities made a difference there. Okay, so now I'm going to cover one more topic, and then I'm going to open it up to any questions you might have. And I imagine you have a lot if you've been watching the news over the past week or so. So a hot topic that I usually cover at sessions like this is, how do I read my electric bill? The number one question, hands down, I get is, why is my delivery rate 3 times my supply? Right. So this part of the presentation is designed to answer that. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a screenshot of a typical electric bill from Eversource. And right now, it is split between supply and delivery. But that's actually a misnomer, because the delivery side of your bill is capturing at least 3 separate buckets. And after we had, right around the time of Tropical Storm Isaias, you may remember there were some unexpected increases in July of 2020. And when we looked into why it happened and what the drivers were, it became apparent that we needed to redesign and rethink the electric bill to make it clear what was going into it. Now, I'm under no impressions that redesigning the bill is going to make it cheaper, but the goal of this effort is to show you what the drivers are of each portion of your bill, and who, more importantly, who regulates each portion of your bill, because it's not Pura. And if you don't know who to advocate to, your chances of affecting the outcome are less. So we have approved a redesign of the bill. It takes the utilities a couple of months to change their IT systems, but sometime in early 2023, you will notice a different format to our bill. For purposes of today, I'm going to talk to you about what it looks like now. So we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, Actually, okay. So 3 categories make up the delivery charge. So I think I'm going to come back to the supply charge, which is the first bucket. Those are actually the electrons, the energy that's coming to power your home. On the delivery side, there are 3 components. There's something called transmission. And you may say, okay, you're charging me to transmit the energy and to distribute it? And the answer is yes. And I'm going to give you an analogy here about the roads. So if you think about this in the context of driving, if you need to go far distances at high speeds, you're going to take a highway, most traditionally. When you're traveling locally, you're going to take you're going to go at shorter distances, slower speeds. It's the same when it comes to electricity. There are things called transmission. So if you're looking outside and you see a very tall pole, okay, that's huge and is way off the ground, that's going to probably be a transmission line. And those are carrying the electricity long distances at high voltages. And those are, because they're going between states over far distances, those are actually regulated by the federal equivalent of Pura. It's known as the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So that can be upwards of 20% of your bill. And so we are going to, in this redesign, more clearly call out for you what portion of your bill is attributable to transmission. And the people to advocate here to are your U.S. representatives and U.S. senators, as they can effectuate change at the federal level about the rules and regulations that the FERC abides by. Another category on your on that side of the bill and the delivery is called distribution. So again, those are akin to the roads. They're getting the electricity, the transmission, it's stepping down to a lower voltage, it's going a shorter distance to you as the end user customer. This is the portion of the bill that Pura regulates. In fact, it's really the only portion of the bill that Pura regulates. It's about anywhere between 30 and 40% of your bill. And that is changed through what's called a rate case. So UI has a rate, United Illuminating is in for a rate case right now. Eversource has not signaled that they're coming in for a rate case. They haven't been in since 2017. The third category under the delivery charge are public policy programs. So these are items that the legislature has adopted and is putting through your electricity bill. So these could be things like your renewable energy programs. They can be programs that help lower income individuals. There was a power purchase agreement to retain Millstone, a nuclear entity. So those are items that are flowing through your electricity bill, energy efficiency programs. So whole umbrella, they are traditionally related to the provision of electricity service, but they are pass-through items on which the utilities are not making a profit, and I don't have the ability to deny cost recovery for it because they are programs that are being administered due to the passage of certain legislation. So I'm going to come back to the supply portion of your bill, which has been in the news a lot this week. So the supply portion of your bill, which has historically been between 30 and 40%, I think is going to be more on par with all the other components moving forward. You may have seen in the news last week that both Eversource and UI have notified Pura that their supply rates are increasing January 1st. So in 1998, the legislature took an action, Public Act 9828, if anyone wants to read it, was 300 pages of gobbledygook. It did what is called deregulation. We're not the only state that did this. About half of the states in the country deregulated their generation component. And what that means is they told Eversource and UI, you all have to divest ownership over generation assets. So Eversource and UI do not own any power plants in the region. And again, as I said, this is about half of the country did this. In fact, in New England, every state but Vermont did this. So instead, because Eversource and UI do not own any power plants, they have to procure the electricity on the competitive market. And there's a regional market for New England that we participate in. So our utilities procure the electricity for residential customers. It's a product called standard service or default service. And that rate changes twice a year. It changes on January 1 and July 1. And if you go back to your bills that you may have from the past couple of years, you'll see it always goes up on January 1, and it traditionally goes down on July 1. Why is that? Well, it's because almost 50% of the generation in New England is sourced from natural gas. I know that's kind of counterintuitive because you think, well, natural gas, I'm heat with that. But the generation, the electricity, over half of it from this region comes from natural gas, which means that we are very tied into the global commodity price for gas, particularly because we rely on what's called liquefied natural gas, rather than we have limited pipelines that come up from Pennsylvania, say. And this liquefied natural gas, you may see it referred to as LNG. We are competing with our European neighbors right now for LNG. So winter, so the January 1 to June 30th, is traditionally more expensive to generate electricity because it's harder to get natural gas. July 1 to December 31st is traditionally less expensive because we generate less of our electricity with natural gas. Now, with all those trends being said, we have never seen prices that we are seeing now. It's unheard of, it's unprecedented. We are not the only state in New England subject to this. You have neighbors in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. You're seeing them go up. Some of them are going up more than us, some are going up less. Those depend on the nuances of how the utilities have procured electricity. But in all of these states, the answer is the same, which is that the utilities are procuring this electricity from the market. They're passing it through to customers at no more and no less than what they actually purchased it for. They are not allowed to earn a profit on this. So when you may have seen in the news over the past couple of days that Pura has to approve this. I may be playing semantics here. I don't like the terminology that Pura approves this because to me that implies I have the opportunity to reject it. I do not. I don't have the authority to reject it. I don't have the authority to modify it. If I tell the utilities, forget it, you can't charge that rate, they're not going to buy you the electricity, which means on January 1 when you turn your lights on, there will be nothing there. So, you know, that's a really interesting thing. The 1998 legislation that literally removed our authority to regulate that price, that's something that would be difficult to unwind. Difficult, not impossible, but that is a longer conversation. So what can you do about it? Because I imagine there are a lot of you, like me, my husband's a teacher, I don't have a lot, I've got 2 small kids, not a lot of room in the budget here. If you're facing a 48% increase in your supply rates, what can you do? So I'm going to talk to you about an option. We'll go forward to the Energize CT. So if you've never visited this website, it's a website that the state oversees. It's called EnergizeCT.com. Now in 1988, when they deregulated the generation sector, they did at the same time allow you to shop for your electricity provider. Some of you may have done this in the past. It's not something I typically recommend because there are a lot of consumer protection pitfalls here, but I want to put this option in front of you. If you are a customer of Eversource, you can go to EnergizeCT.com. You can go forward a slide. On this page is something called the rate board. You can go to this page and you can type in where you live, and it will populate offers for the supply rate. And it will tell you what that offers are compared to the standard service rate. So the standard service rate is what we've just been talking about that the utility is going to charge. It's going to be in the 22 to 24 cent range. I apologize, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. But when you go to the rate board, it will tell you, okay, well right now I have these many offers, that are less expensive. And you can enter into a contract with that, they're called a third-party supplier. Now, the reason that we don't typically recommend this is because there have been a lot of pitfalls with third-party suppliers over the past 2 decades. This is not something that you set and forget. This is something that you need to pay attention to on a monthly basis, because a lot of these folks will offer a teaser rate, or they'll offer a rate that locks in for 6 months and then auto-renews at a higher rate. So if you have the time and the energy and the ability to go on here and shop around for your provider, it's something that you need to do on a monthly basis. And because of legislation we got passed last year, they cannot charge early termination fees. So this would be the time to try and experiment with this, but it's something that you need to look at on a monthly basis. And I'm going to provide our, go for it. Okay, so we do have a division of my staff who monitor and enforce customer service protections on these third-party suppliers. A lot of times you may see in the news that we've issued hefty fines. So when we find them violating the rules, we can issue them a fine and order restitution. We've done that in a couple of cases lately. But you know, that takes some time to develop the case. And while you may eventually get your money back, you're going to have to wait for the court case. So again, if you're going to shop for a third-party supplier, please do not set it and forget it. How you'll know if you have a third-party supplier, because you may have one today. Can you rewind to the first page of the bill? Okay, so if you're on the first page of your electric bill, this call-out box, it will be on the first page under your kind of bar graph there. It will say your electric supplier is, and then it will tell you who it is. So that will update on a monthly basis. You can shop around and change suppliers every month if you want to. But if you look today, it should, and you have standard service, which 84% of the customers in the state of Connecticut use standard service, it will say your electric supplier is Eversource. So that's how you can tell on a monthly basis. And it will also tell you what the standard service rate in effect is at that time and what the rate is that they're charging you. But your bill will still come from Eversource. Okay, so let's go forward. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. I will leave this up on the screen for a second. We do have a couple of staff. We've got about an 80-person agency with a lot of responsibilities. We do have a call center that can help, and the number is on the screen. We also take complaints by email. There's also a web form. But if you are having an issue with your utility, if you're having an issue with a third-party supplier, if you need help connecting to Xfinity or whomever you have, we are open 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. On all weekdays except for state holidays. So well, one thing that we can do is help investigate a matter. We can help put you in touch with the utility if you're having trouble getting a hold of them. We can make sure that the utility is following all regulations and statutes. So that's what we can do through these customer call center. So you can leave that up on the screen, and I think we have plenty of time if there are questions. Yes, sir.
Back in 2020, Governor Lamont and Eversource said that the increase was in part of due to people staying home and using more electricity. Is that reason now by the wayside?
Sure. So the question is, with the change in habits of people working from home during the pandemic, does that affect the rates that we're seeing? The answer is no, not really. So it's not affecting what we're seeing right now. The supply rate increase is more attributable to the global commodity rate for gas.
So that reason was then, but now there's a different reason now, because what was happening in 2020, people staying home, is no longer happening now, so the reason is different.
Correct.
Okay, well, that sounds awfully convenient to me. May I go on with a few more? There was a power purchase agreement between the state and Millstone back in 2020, right?
Correct.
Do you think that that agreement has been helpful to the consumers so far?
So it's a great question. What is going on with the Millstone Power Purchase Agreement? Has it been helpful to customers? So I don't know how many of you have your electricity bills with you, but if you have a bill from, let's say, August versus this month's bill, you will notice there is a line item on your bill that is not there right now, the FMCC. That's because the Millstone Power Purchase Agreement has generated revenue for the state that's being returned to you as ratepayers right now and has allowed us to offset the public policy cost of your bill through April 30th. So yes, I do believe the Power Purchase Agreement has been beneficial to ratepayers because it has allowed us to put that revenue towards offsetting costs on your bill through the end of April.
Well, with the way the rates have been going up, well, me, just a regular consumer, like everybody else, I don't think we see that agreement being helpful to us. And if nobody else has questions, I'll just the company or whoever you talk to seems to be redundant in how to get us to save money on our electric rates. Like, is your AC running efficiently? Do you change your filters? Raise the AC temperature, lower the water heater temperature, unplug the unused appliances. Aren't there any better reasons? Like, for example, I hear Pura has jurisdiction over the salaries of the top 4 or 5 Eversource executives, and together, back in 2020, they were making $40 million a year. Wow. Has their salary gone down at all in order to maybe give a little back to the consumer in order to maybe save us something? I'm not sure if they cut their salary in half and they only made $20 million. $20 million back into the system.
Sure, so I can answer both those questions. So on the second part of the question regarding salaries, so unfortunately that's not correct. Pura does not have jurisdiction over the salaries. What we do have, so Eversource, let's take them for an example. They have a regulated utility in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. They also have unregulated utilities like offshore wind. So the salaries that their executives are making are being fed from all of those sources, right? So there is a portion of their salary that is allocated to Connecticut ratepayers. That is the portion that, because of the Take Back Our Grid Act in 2020, I now have authority over if they come in for a rate case. So let me say this a different way. I cannot tell them, you cannot pay your CEO $40 million. But if $5 million of that is coming from Connecticut ratepayers, I can tell them, because of the Take Back Our Grid Act, you can only collect $5 million if X, Y, and Z. Because the Take Back Our Grid Act allows me to tie the portion of compensation that is being recovered in rates, it allows me to tie that to their performance. So when Eversource comes in for a rate case, which is when I can set their distribution rates, then I will have the opportunity to say to them, tell me what portion of your salary is being collected from Connecticut ratepayers, and then I'm going to tell you what you have to do in order to continue that. And that's what I'm doing with UI right now, for example, with their rate case. Now, on the first part of the gentleman's question regarding energy efficiency programs, if you recall, when we were talking about the components of your bill, energy efficiency programs are funded through a charge on your bill under the public policy line items. Unfortunately, Pura does not have jurisdiction over the energy efficiency programs. They are administered by DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, in conjunction with the utilities. I'm happy to take back any feedback that you have and pass it on to the regulator of those programs. But hopefully I've answered the gist of your question.
Okay.
What
Does anybody else want a chance?
what about the payouts to the stockholders?
So the question is, what about the payouts to the stockholders? So as we talked about in the beginning, the utilities are held by stockholders. They're investor owned. So when they're in for a rate case, we can ask questions like, what were the dividends that you paid out? What is the profit margin? So those are questions that we can tackle in a rate case through something that's called the return on equity. So much of what we do, if it's not governed by state law, is controlled by the U.S. Supreme Court. There are 2 cases that are about 150 years old. One of them says, I was hearing some laughs that were being governed by 150-year-old case law. But one of those cases says that by law, the utilities have to be given the opportunity to earn a reasonable return on investment in the system. So when you hear folks reference, well, they're getting a minimum rate of return, it's not entirely accurate, it's close enough. But during the Take Back Our Grid legislation from 2 years ago, the legislation directed Pura to do what's called performance-based regulation, which is a totally different way of regulating these utilities than the whole world has done. So we're about 18 months into that docket. There's only one other state in the whole world that does performance-based regulation, so it's taken us a little bit of time, not a lot to look to. But in the meantime, if the utility comes in for a rate case, like UI is right now, then we can adjust the return on equity and say, like, you have the opportunity to earn X instead of what they're getting right now. So that would be handled through a rate case.
Back in August 2020, a newspaper article said that Richard Blumenthal went to Eversource and demanded that Chief Executive James Judge resign, and demanded that Eversource make refunds to customers. Did either of those happen?
James did resign, yes, sir. The refunds to customers, Eversource did not do voluntarily. Those were ordered by us that I was discussing a few minutes ago.
Was James Judge given like a good severance package?
He was, the Eversource shareholders made him the, I forget the title, it was the head of their board. He has since been released fully. But those are not things that we have the legal authority to.
All that seems unfair to me. Okay. Maybe there's nothing we can do about it, but maybe we could stop voting in the people who we vote in.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry, there's a
Sure.
question. Yes, sir.
Real quick, prior to deregulation, did the state, directing it towards you, did the state control better the increase that?
I don't think that was ever the case. I returned to the chairwoman, but the state, I thought it was 2008 that they removed that ability to.
I have 23 years ago.
Ability, right?
That was
1998.
98, and then something in 08 as well.
There were some refinements. There's the introduction of the regional grid operator, ISO New England.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, we never really had the teeth, but I'd love to go back into session and at the local level to try to stimulate whatever, but the feds really have the majority control, right?
They do. So in order for, here's the ironic part. In order for Pura to have more authority today over the supply rates, we would have to give Eversource the power to own generation. So my regulatory hook is over what Eversource does. So if they don't own the generation, then I can't tell them what to charge for it.
Were they worried about the monopoly effect of owning the generation?
They were. So it was, the market was deregulated on the theory that competition would bring lower prices for generation. So it's a wonderful theory. You'd have to look over the last 2 decades as to whether that's panned out for customers. And I think you may have done that.
Yeah, well, it says here, once they've deregulated everything, this is from one of the Senator Norm Needleman, it's out of control. They have there's no power anywhere. They can do whatever they want, raise whatever they want, and we're paying the penalty. So going back to getting regulated again,
Yeah.
it's like our,
No, phone companies, right?
yeah,
Phone company was great. You dropped the phone, now you drop the phone, it breaks.
yeah. It was like cable, one time it was regulated. State controlled it, prices were low. Well, let's deregulate it. Bad word to use. Boom, everything goes up again. We've lost the power. There's nothing,
I
so.
agree.
Now Governor Lamont, well, this is real quick, he's outraged by the shock of the rate increase. Attorney General William Pong, he's frustrated that there's nothing that can be done. Now, I'm not picking on you.
No, I agree.
But
Yeah.
I just want to voice that something has to be done. I mean, like the gentleman over there said, we are taxpayers, voters. I'm not trying to, you guys are in both tough situations here, but it's just
I agree with you.
frustrating.
As lawmakers, you want to make laws that help your constituents, the whole state. But at the local level, or at the state level, you don't have the teeth that the federal government has. And again, the people in authority have to agree. Right now, we're in the minority party, but I think everyone feels this pinch, and I hope some action gets taken to give agencies like Pura more authority, and also the deregulation part of it. It's not necessarily a great thing when you have a monopoly, what they say is a monopoly. It's not always a bad thing. There's a certain degree of monopoly. When you give up generation and all that, you lose your ability to control anything.
Well,
Other than buying
Eversource,
power in the market.
Eversource, my bill is paid through Dallas, Texas. So they bought up all the smaller companies. Like remember back in the day, we had CL&P,
Right.
which they were back. It's just, I'm frustrated.
No, but I agree. Someone said, oh, there's a problem, there's a monopoly, we have to break this all up.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was to our advantage.
I think we probably have time for one more question.
I shop around for generators. My daughter takes care of it, she's very savvy. And a lot of times, the past one I had it stopped in September, it was 7.5 cents. Another source was was 11.5. No, sometimes it's like 3 to 5 cents between what you can find in Eversource. I found out Eversource was always more expensive for generation.
So you or your daughter must be shopping well, because
My daughter, she knows, she goes through this, she knows what she's doing, she goes through everything. Sometimes we'll have a good price for a whole year.
yeah, I mean, it's a great testimonial that if you're engaged, you can certainly shop around. And it's something I would encourage you to look into the energizect.com account. And if you have the ability to monitor it, there is definitely an opportunity to get a better supply rate than what is being offered as standard service.
Are you giving out a paper note to different suppliers that you can call?
It's dynamic because sometimes they change their rates.
I don't do the computer, so. I've done it years ago, but I'm just restricted to Eversource. But 50 years ago, it cost me $79 a month every December and January. 50 years ago, now this coming month, you're talking $900 a month. I have bills, I know bills. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a few more questions. We'll see.
Well, it's not a question, just a real quick statement.
Sure.
I'm looking towards your way. The CEO, Joe Nolan of Eversource, says, blame it on the Russians.
Yeah.
That's what I have right here. Then it goes on to say, blame it on Pura for all the cost increases. I don't know what that's.
You know, there's a lot of finger pointing going on. The
All right,
bottom
just-
line is, in my opinion,
Yeah.
my lowly opinion, is to open up these ports to bring in fuel sources if we can't open up our own fuel lines. There are environmental people that would argue with that. But we know what it's like when we were producing our own power and generating more
Right.
propane and natural gas and things like that. I think the key is we need another source or we're going to be held hostage.
All right. Understood. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, how about a round of applause for Thank you very much. First of all, I want to wish all of my constituents, my families, my friends, and everyone in the state of Connecticut a happy and healthy holiday and a season of joy. We all need it. Okay, thank you very much. You know, today at the Senior Center in Waterbury, we had a forum with the chairman of PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, Ms. Marissa Gillette, who did a great job explaining what PURA's role is and what exact authority they have. And what it comes down to is that the power companies, without an additional source from another country, from offshore drilling, from on our own United States land, opening up pipelines, that they were pretty much held hostage by the rates that these companies charge because they have to buy the fuel from other countries. People will say, well, Russia's holding us hostage and so forth. The bottom line is we have to find a happy compromise between environmentalists who won't let us open up these pipelines and people that can't pay and choosing between food and medicine now to be able to pay the difference in what these new rates are going to be starting in January of 23. So what I can say is please reach out to your local legislators who can then hopefully cause an effect with the federal legislators and create laws that will help us to lower these bills. Right now, they're astronomical and they're only getting worse. And I'm sorry to say that unless your vote to change that happens, it's going to just keep increasing. Thank you.